will allow you to process a number of records very quickly in order to do a variety of things. For example, workflow is something that is used in a number of situations, like, for example, approval of an expense report as an example, or approval of some kind of proposal that is being made. And in a variety of cases, what you would like to do is provide your end users with an ability to essentially go through and mark all of these items to a different state than what it originally is. So if you look at the goal that we have, what we want to be able to do is add a couple of buttons first, and then the user then can select one or more rows. As an example, in this particular example, we have a list of products here. And what we want to do is mark the products as discontinued or unmark them as discontinued. And again, this particular example may or may not make sense for all of you, but generally the concept of essentially being able to process a number of records and mark them from one state to another state is what we are trying to focus on. And then, so the user, essentially the end user selects one or more rows and then clicks one of the buttons that is something that we have added on the top there. And then what we want to do is essentially update the list of things here and mark those as with the changes over there. Kind of to see this in reality, let's go through and do that. So what I'm going to do is switch over to my application over here. So I built this application earlier, and what I want to do is basically say, in this particular case, let's say for just the purpose of this argument, even though there are 8 pages, we're going to look at the first 10 records, and we're going to, right now, all of them are marked as no, and if we press the mark as discontinued, hopefully all of them will be marked as yes once I'm done with that process. Early in the morning, usually the first time around, let's see, there's an error on the page here. Okay. Oh, it's updating some other page over here. Okay, I'm not sure exactly what's going on. Hang on just one second. I thought I had done this thing, but okay. We'll go ahead and reload the pages here. Mark those as discontinued. Looks like they were already marked as discontinued, but the page did not get updated. But so what I'll do is I'll go ahead and unmark as discontinued. So hopefully immediately after that, the page gets updated, and you can see all of these marked as discontinued. So if I just select 2 of those, then I'll only flip the discontinued flag for those 2 items. So that's our goal. That's what we want to do. So we're going to go through a number of steps over here in order to do that. Our strategy is going to be the following. What we need to do is make some layout changes and make some code customization changes. What are the layout changes that we need to do? We need to basically add 2 buttons, the mark and the unmark button. And what we need to do is set the page properties for those buttons with the button text and do the bindings, which is what is going to happen at that point in time. That's kind of the basic layout customization that we need to do. And on the code side, what we need to do is we need to make sure that once we add the buttons, we need to first do a build so that new functions are added for the 2 buttons. And then what we will do is override the click handlers for both the buttons in order to essentially handle the click and basically make the changes that we need to make for setting the discontinued flag one way or another. So the first thing that we're going to do basically is we're going to insert the button. Now, I'm going to actually not go through the presentation here, but this presentation is here, and it is available. We'll go through step by step, and I'll show you a link to this presentation at the end of our session over here. So instead of me going through the presentation and showing you, I'm going to actually show it to you in the software itself. So let's go to IronSpeed Designer. And what we're going to do here is we're looking at a different application here. It's called Training 2 here that I just created. And what I'm going to do is go to a step-by-step process here and show you how we can do that. What we need to do is add a couple of buttons here on the button bar. And I'm going to highlight the pagination. And what I'm going to do is right mouse click on this pagination button, and I'm going to insert some HTML. And specifically what I'm going to do is I'm going to insert 2 columns on the left of the pagination. I could have selected the button bar and done the same thing, but this is easier to do it. So I'm just going to go ahead and select column to the left. And so it inserted a very thin, narrow column. I'm going to go ahead and select the pagination again and insert a second column to the left basically as well. So now that gives me place to have two buttons effectively. So you can see here is the one place and here is another one basically. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up the toolbox. I go to the view menu and bring up the toolbox. And what I'm going to do is then once I open up the control section here, and I'm going to drag and drop two buttons. So the first time around, I'm going to take the first button and drop it over here. And then I'm going to take the same button and then drop it a second time in the second cell that's over there. Okay, there you have it. So I've gotten two buttons over there. Obviously, the buttons, they have a generic text that is being displayed over there. We'll make some of those changes here. So the next step that we want to do is we want to rename these buttons. I'm going to get rid of the toolbox here. We no longer need that. And if I click on this button, basically, and then right mouse click, I have an ability to rename it. So I'm just going to basically call this, initially the name is a generic name that is given called button. So what I'm going to do is mark it, give it a name like mark, just call it mark as discontinued. And I have now all I've done is renamed it. I've not changed the text of the button. So that's why it does not reflect anything different over here. It just still says button. I'm going to do the same thing with this button, which is right mouse click and rename it. This one was called button 1. And I'm going to just call it unmark as discontinued over here. So that allows me to essentially change the name. Now what I need to do is change the text on those buttons and basically set the bindings of that button. So I'm going to select the button over here and I will double click it. Alternatively, I can simply go ahead and press the page properties in order to bring up the page properties dialog box. But in my case, I'm going to simply double click it. And this will bring up what's called the Page Properties dialog box. The Page Properties dialog box, by double-clicking, takes me straight to that particular button, and I can then put in, mark as discontinued over here, and then I can say button to demonstrate discontinuation of products. Okay, so I can put a tooltip text if I so choose to. And then I'll switch over to the Bindings tab. And in the case of the Bindings tab, I will set the button command to custom because I want to make sure that I actually override the click handler. And I'm going to say stay on the current page because I don't need to essentially go to another page like other buttons, for example. In this case, I just want to refresh the current the page itself. So that's all I need to do on this particular button. I'm going to switch over to the unmark as discontinued and then go to the display tab and then unmark as discontinued, and then I will put a button to demonstrate unmarking of products. Okay, so something simple as that. I go back to bindings and I'll do the same thing, which is select custom and put stay on current page. So what I've done is now completed the layout customization. Kind of to summarize the layout customization, I dragged and dropped two buttons, and then I set their bindings. That's kind of the basic philosophy here. And now I've got two buttons with their proper names here being reflected over here. And I'm going to save this file, and then I'm going to, as you remember, one of the things that we'll need to do is we need to build it. So I'm going to just go ahead and build this. And what this will allow me to do is effectively create click handlers for those buttons. So now my code behind recognizes these buttons. So at this point in time, I'm done with the layout customization. And what I need to do now is go ahead and add the code customization that is necessary in order to essentially handle these buttons. Kind of that's the most important thing to do, basically. So in this particular case, what code should I add, or how should I add that? Kind of the basic philosophy behind how we want to go through is press this code button here. When we press this code button, what we do is we see a couple of slides here, a couple of classes over here, and what we want to do is show you essentially how to add these handlers, effectively click handlers. So in this particular case, these buttons, if you remember, belong to the table. We basically have three sets of classes that are available to you. Let me go to the PowerPoint slides and kind of just quickly show you that. Okay, so if you look at the page classes and control hierarchy of what we create, for every table page, we create essentially 3 classes. Those are shown in yellow over here. There's a page class, there's a class that corresponds to the table control, and a class that corresponds to the row. In this particular case, what we want to be able to do is make changes at the table control level, because that is the most specific level that we can get to. We don't want to make it at the page level because the page may have multiple table controls. In this example, there's only one, but in other examples, there may be multiple table controls. And we don't want to make it to the row because this button does not correspond to a specific row. It corresponds to the entire table. So the most logical place for us to do it is at the table control class level, basically. And so what we need to do is, switching back to RNSpeed Designer, what we need to do is make changes at the table control class level. If you notice, the first class is a page class. The other 2 are the table control classes, and then finally the table control row class. And then you can, of course, bring up the code customization wizard. Now, within the table control class, there's a base class, which is where all of our generated code resides. And then there is a regular product table control class, which is where we can add our functions, basically. Now, since we built, we already will see a couple of click handlers that have been added for us by RNSpeed Designer. One is mark as discontinued, and then if you go all the way down, there will be unmark as discontinued, since this is an alphabetical list, I believe. Although create where clause showed up over here, not in order. But anyway, so what we want to do is we want to insert a mark as discontinued click handler, as well as an unmark as discontinued. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select mark as discontinued click handler, and because of the plus button over here, it's going to be added over into my code behind, basically. So a shell handler is inserted for me over here in my code behind in the right place, and I don't have to worry about where else to insert it and things like that. It's a very easy thing for me to do. What I'm going to do is save this and switch back to my page, and then I'm going to do the same thing with unmark as well, just so that I have both of those functions inserted back there. So I'll go ahead and click unmark as discontinued and insert that. So now I have both the mark and the unmark inserted, one below another, and you can see both the mark as discontinued and the unmark as discontinued added over there. So both of those are there. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut and paste some code from my document over here, but I will then walk through that code to show you exactly what it basically does. So I'm going to open up my. By the way, you will have access to this document because you will see that on the link that I will show you at the end of this presentation. So actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy just the inner section of this thing and paste it here. Okay. And what we will do is we'll go ahead and indent it. Okay, now one of the things is that I left the my base call over there, but I really don't need to call my base because the default click handler does not do anything in this particular case because I specifically selected custom as my action type in my bindings tab. So I could leave it as is and it won't do anything, or I could just simply delete it. Fine, let's just delete it and go through that thing. Now let's look at the code and see what our code tries to do over here and understand that. The basic philosophy behind the code is the following. The key part here that you need to understand is this function called getSelectedRecordControls. That is the key part over here. And then let's walk through what else we need to do. We need to generally start a transaction, commit a transaction, because once we have changed the database records, and then we finally need to end that transaction, basically. So that's kind of the start, the commit, and the end transaction that you see over here. I'm going to see if I can get all of my, I'm going to delete these empty lines over here so that I can show you all of the code on one screen here. So bear with me for a second here. Okay. So there you have it. So now you can see that hopefully the entire function here. There you go. So mark as discontinued. So the first thing that I'm trying to do basically is I'm going to start a transaction. then what I need to do is, of course, put the commit transaction and the end transaction. And then in here, we also need to be able to catch an exception and then simply call a function called register JScript alert, which simply displays an alert box, like a message box, with the exception message in case there is an exception, basically. Now, so we have started the database transaction. Now, within the database transaction, what do we need to do? The first thing we need to do is we need to find out what record controls or rows, effectively, did the user select. Well, how can we access that? We can access that by essentially calling a function called getSelectedRecordControls. What this does is it returns back all of the record controls. Now, keep in mind that these are user interface controls. These are not database controls. These are not database records. These are simply user interface controls that correspond to the row that is being displayed. So it will have access to all of the UI controls, like if there is an ASP colon literal or an ASP colon text box that is displayed in the row, it will have access to all of those controls. So what we need to do is essentially go through for each record control in the selected record controls. What do we need to do? We need to then we have access to the record control's unique ID. This is the unique ID that is being kept with each record control so as to identify the ID that can be used in order to look that record up from the database. So what we need to do is once we get hold of the selected record controls for each of those records, what we want to do is go read from the database the specific record that corresponds to that row. And how can we do that? Because it's a products table, we can use the class, which is a class that will be available for every database table. So if your table name is called products, then you simply add the suffix table to it, so products table or customers table or shippers table or employees table. Dot get record, we want to get a single record, and we also have a function available called gets records. But in this case, we need to get a single record. We pass in the unique ID of that record, and we pass in a second parameter called true. And this parameter basically says that what I intend to do is modify this record and save it back once I have that. If I pass false, I'm not going to get a writable record. I'm just going to get a readable record, effectively. So in this case, I want an updatable or writable record, so I pass true to that thing. I do my error checking over here, make sure that I get a record back, because in case some other user from it's a multi-user environment, some other user may have deleted that particular record while I am looking at this particular page. So I need to verify that, this record still continues to exist. And I can do that by just checking to make sure that the rec is something which is not nothing. And then I do the two small things that I need to do, which is mark the rec discontinued flag to true, essentially in this case, because I'm marking as discontinued, so I set it to true, and then I save the record. And that's all there is to do in order to process all of the selected records that are displayed on the screen, basically. And once I do that, then obviously I need to essentially commit the transaction, and I need to end that transaction. And that's all effectively that you need to do. Keep in mind that we're using the automatically generated data access class called products table, and we're also utilizing the data access class that corresponds to each record from the database called products record. So if your table name is called, customers, this would be called customers record, and so on. And each one of the fields are accessible only by just doing a rec.discontinued, or if there was a rec.product name, for example, you would just simply do that way. So it's fairly easy for you to essentially look at all of the database access layers very easily by essentially using the name of the table followed by some suffix like table or record, and then adding either methods or fields related to that. Now my unmark is actually very similar to this as well. All I'm going to do is I'm going to simply copy this function and change one line of code, the one line of code being mark discontinued as false. Now, we can make this more efficient, obviously, by essentially writing some other generic third function to do that. But for the purpose of this demo, we'll not worry about that efficiency. So all we'll do is, in this case of unmark, we'll just send this to false. And that's all there is to it. Now, if I simply build and then run, And hopefully what it will allow me to do is bring up the application where now I have the ability to show you things as marked as discontinued and unmarked as discontinued working over there. So while I demonstrate, if there are other questions that you have related to this code customization, I'll be glad to answer them. Now, so here is the application. You will notice that I've got the discontinued showing up on the right-hand side over here in this particular application. And I have the ability to then select, let's say we select 4 or 5 or 6 of these things and mark as discontinued. And so you will notice that all of them have changed back. And if I wanted to select these 2 and unmark as discontinued, then I can do that. Notice that we added a tooltip button to demonstrate discontinuation of products, and another one to demonstrate unmarking the button tooltip that shows up over here. And I can certainly do it in groups of all of them unmarked. So that's how easy it is for me to essentially add a workflow capability to my application and utilize the power of all of the data access layers and everything that is generated for you, as well as to use the code button that is available to you as part of the user interface in order to be able to handle that.